Welcome to today's webcast. This is Carl Landers, CMO at Conversica, coming to you live from San Francisco. And joining me on today's call, I'm very pleased to welcome our guest speaker, Gabe Larsen, VP of Marketing Strategy at InsideSales.com, joining us from Salt Lake City. Gabe, welcome to today's webcast.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm excited to be on. I think it's an important topic and excited to jump into it.
Awesome, and excited to have you on board and excited to have all of you, our listeners and viewers today, joining from all around the world. We got a lot of people signed up for this webcast. Everyone, I think, wants to know, how can I be faster at everything in life? And we're going to talk about how to be faster in following up on leads. Just a couple of things before we start. We are recording today's webcast, and we will, of course, provide you with a copy of the recording and the slides and the research reports that we are going to talk about today. And there'll be a follow-up email after the webcast that'll include all of that. If you want to ask a question, please do so whenever it comes to mind. There's a green question mark icon at the top of your screen. Click that, type in as many questions as you like to send over, and we will get to as many of those as possible during our webcast. And if not, we'll follow up afterwards. And finally, stick around to the end because we have some great prizes we're going to give away. We're giving away 5 Amazon gift cards at the end of this webcast to anyone, not to anyone, to the lucky winners who are still on at the end. We're going to draw 5 names and send you gift cards. And thank you for sticking with us. So with that, let's get started. We're talking about promptness in lead follow-up and how much revenue are you losing due to slow response time. So there is some kind of seminal research here in the topic, and it comes actually from your 2 speakers' companies. So on the left, we have a report from Conversica called the Sales Effectiveness Lead Follow-Up Study. This is the 3rd year we've done this. We survey more than 800 companies by essentially going to the website, finding the most obvious product or service that's offered and requesting information about it. And then we measure over a 21-day period, how many follow-ups are there, how quickly, how personable, etc. Now on the Gabe side, on InsideSales.com, has been doing this even longer. Some really great research. Gabe, tell us a little bit about the Inside Sales research.
Yeah, this was a real fun study we did. Actually, it was now a decade ago, and it was cool enough that Harvard actually called us up and said, "Hey, can we do a deeper dive on this?" But it basically was an accumulation of about 3 years of data. Similar, we looked at companies who were basically responding to leads. We had 15,000 unique leads, I think we looked at the time, a little over 100,000 call attempts. We've since redone the study about 5 or 6 times to double down on that. So we're now looking at thousands and thousands of data points. So some real interesting findings, though, as people start to think about how they should and shouldn't manage their leads.
Fantastic. It's really great research. In fact, we relied on it as the foundation for the research we created. So it's really groundbreaking work. And we're going to share some of the results of that with you. And as I mentioned, send you both of these reports. But first, let's get a little audience interaction going here. We've got a poll question that we're going to bring up. We'd like you to tell us, how quickly does your company respond to inbound leads? So take your best guess. If you were to go submit a inquiry on your company's website for the product or service that you think is, your best offer, how long would it take for your company, someone from your company, to get back in touch in a personable way? And we can see responses are starting to flow in. I guess I won't vote. That wouldn't be fair. Gabe, did you vote?
I didn't vote. I probably shouldn't.
But it looks like most think that they're not hitting that 5-minute window, Gabe. We've got about 9% there. The majority they believe they're between that 5-minute and 1-hour time. We've still got a chunk at saying they're going to take an hour to a day. and a disturbing number that are going to take from a day to a week to follow up.
Well, at least they're honest, though, Carl. At least they're honest, right?
Fair enough. Fair enough. Let's close the poll. And so that's really interesting. Let's compare that now with what we found in the research that we did. So these are the 2017 results from the lead follow-up kind of secret shopper survey, 866 companies. This doesn't represent all 866 because, believe it or not, when we surveyed 866 companies, almost a third of them didn't respond at all. Not a single phone call or email. I guess that wasn't a choice in our poll. We don't respond at all, but that happened, believe it or not. So this is 2/3 of the companies that did respond, and you can see most of them fell in that 1 hour to 1 day. And we had a good chunk in the 6 to 60 minutes, which is what a number of you voted for as well. But as the bullets on the right say, nearly 90% of companies aren't hitting the 5-minute sweet spot. And we're going to talk about the 5-minute sweet spot and why that's so important here in a second. So Gabe, I guess my takeaway is our attendees are skewed a little bit more optimistically than our results found. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of the things you and I were talking about, Carl. I think, one of the things people don't realize, and we'll be talking about this a little bit more as we get into it, is that sometimes people actually, they do think they're better than they are. Sometimes I think I go to the gym 3 times a week, and I don't. I never go. I mean, there is some sort of psychological thing that goes on there. But truthfully, sometimes your systems are a little bit, misaligned, meaning a sales rep does think he or she is responding very quickly because the punch system in CRM says that I got a lead at this time. But again, what we're finding is that it may actually have taken some time to get there. And so sometimes these people, they're not necessarily lying or they're not misinformed. They're just misinformed about when the lead actually was submitted versus when it hit their CRM. So I think there's a couple different things going on here.
Fair point. Absolutely. And I think my recommendation is everyone should go try this. After this webinar or during it, if you're finding we're not as exciting and enthralling as we should be, go submit, a lead on your own website and measure the response time and make sure it's really what you think it is. Let me show you another result. Now we're looking at those same results, but broken out by industry. So we looked at in that research 13 different industries, and we listed the top 5 here that got an A grade, which means they were responding very quickly. And you can see that 4 out of the 5 are business to consumer, B2C industries. So, excuse me, these guys are doing a good job of jumping on that lead, probably because it's a very competitive space. If you think about that, that first bar there is automotive sales. So these are dealerships that want to sell you a new car. And if you put a lead in, they got to expect that they're competing with several others for your business. But education did surprisingly well, real estate, and another part of automotive. And then we get to our first B2B industry, telecom, and then it goes down from there with, as we saw in the previous slide, we're averaging about 13% of the companies getting an A grade. Gabe, thoughts on this? These consumer-oriented companies seem to be a little more on the ball in terms of prompt follow-up.
Yeah, this is something I've found to be pretty typical, Carl. A lot of people say, hey, where do you get more innovation or where do you get great new ideas? And but truthfully, I often look to the B2C world. They're just they're a little more, they're quicker, they're faster, they change faster, they typically have more data. And so I'm not too surprised to see that a lot of these B2C organizations and functional industry, they just get it more because they're often a little bit ahead of B2B. That's just typically the case.
Yeah, would it be fair to say that some people think, hey, I'm selling $1 million, thing with going to have multiple decision makers and influencers involved, and do I really need to follow up on any one particular individual that quickly? This thing's going to take a year to get sold.
Yeah, I mean, I think humans are humans, Carl, right? It's when it comes down to it, I think a lot of people debate that, and there's a big buzzword out there. People talk about account-based sales, and going after multiple people and bigger deals, and should you really respond to leads? And guys, when you take it down to the very crux of it, if you were, as a person, wanted and requested information, requested to be contacted, wanted to buy something, would you want a response? The answer is normally yes, and I think that's the crux of it, and I think that's where we got to start, and then go out with some of the special circumstances from there. I think people often, Carl, go to the special circumstances first, and then try to back their way in. And I just think, hey, people want to be responded to quicker when they ask for something. Now let's start to let's nail that first, then let's start to look at all the exceptions.
Absolutely. And so let's get to why that is so important. One quick chart before that is just the year-over-year performance. So as I mentioned, this study's been done 3 years in a row. So we compared 2017 on the left bars with 2015, the first version. And we have seen about a 5% increase in the number of companies that are hitting that sweet spot of responding quickly. And so that's good. The trend is kind of in the right direction. But it still feels like way too many companies are taking way too long to follow up. And to your point, we get conditioned as in our consumer life to expect things to happen immediately. We shop on Amazon, we click, we buy, and the thing shows up an hour later at our doorstep. It's affecting our business life as well, and we expect information quickly. And you're going to tell us here, and let me click through to the next slide, Gabe, why this responding so quickly is so important. And this is right out of the original research. Can you walk us through these dramatic findings?
Yeah, I mean, there was a couple things that were highlighted here, right? I mean, and I've made the joke before. What this chart basically says is if you respond faster to leads, you're more likely to have a conversation. And I remember sharing that with my wife, Carl, and she just laughed at me and said, wait a minute. So all this data you studied says if you actually call somebody who says they want to talk to you, you're going to have more conversations? And I said, well, when you put it like that, it does sound like it's a little bit simpler. But guys, look at some of those numbers. I mean, these numbers, 100 times increase in conversations, 5 versus 30 minutes. What that means right there is that when I'm in the moment and I submit a lead, that's obviously when you're going to catch me. I'm on my phone, I'm on my computer. I think that point, Carl, is a little more of a, okay, I get it. What Harvard found to be so interesting was actually that second stat. And that's that 21 increase in qualification. Now, from their standpoint, they had said, look, when people buy, what makes people want a product is the P's of marketing: product, place, promotion, price, speed is not one of the fundamental points taught in all marketing courses for the last 100 years. So they were fascinated when we basically proved unequivocally with hundreds of thousands of data points that if you respond more quickly to people, you have a better chance of getting them in their pipeline and actually closing the deal, and thus changing literally years of marketing analysis of, well, price and placement and product, those are all important, but we now introduce the factor of speed as something that affects buying behavior, and it's fascinating.
Yeah, and I think that the important takeaway here not only is the dramatic decrease if you wait beyond that 5-minute sweet spot, is that you have correlated this not to just getting someone on the phone or getting a response by email, but to actually moving them along, right, as a sales opportunity, whether that's
right.
selling
That's
something,
right.
Getting a meeting set up, whatever the thing is that you want to achieve with your leads. I think, I'm sure you'll agree with me, and you have the same experience as do our viewers here, that you're on a website, you're researching a topic, you're thinking about that thing in that moment. Maybe your boss said to you, hey, why don't you go investigate better webinar platforms or, better, I don't know, drill bits for your dentist chair. That's a really weird example, but, you have something in mind that you're researching, you're on that site, you've gone to the extent of giving up your contact information. That's super valuable. You've said, here's me, here's my email address. It just makes sense that if somebody reaches out right away, I'm going to still be in that mindset. If you reach out to me an hour later, I'm on to something else. I've got another project I'm thinking about, and I've lost interest in talking about that particular subject. I'm sure you experience the same thing, Gabe.
Yeah, I mean, there is something. I think all this data is pointing to really just the shift in generational. We now know that the workplace, we got almost 50% millennials dominating the workplace, and there's this mindset of instant gratification generation. And we all know Amazon. We all get things. We turn on. We don't go down to Blockbuster and rent movies anymore, Carl. We just, we buy it right there. And so there's this instance that we have and we expect right now, but for some reason, B2B companies, haven't got onto that. They don't realize that the B2C world has now influenced the B2B buying behaviors, and we got to catch up.
Absolutely. And I think the way to think about this, back to our original subtitle of the webinar about revenue, is if you're looking at this chart, if 20 people say, I'm interested in your product or service, and you take longer than 5 minutes to follow up, according to the inside sales research, only one of those you're really going to qualify into the next step of the sales process. And so 19 of those people who raised their hand aren't going to get qualified and aren't going to become insurance policies or security software or dentist drill bits or whatever it is that your particular organization sells.
Well, and I think, one of the things, I think some good questions, potentially coming through on this is, not all leads maybe deserve to be responded to immediately. And I know we're going to hit on that later.
Oh, yes.
Look, you guys, when someone comes in on a contact us form and is saying, I want to be that you got to do, then there's going to be some differing degrees there. And we're going to talk about how to maybe handle that. But for those really good leads, you got to get to them. End of story.
Absolutely. And our next chart is just another reinforcement of why that's so important. So Integrate put out a report at the end of last year, and they cited a demand gen survey, and we're showing the results here. They asked B2B buyers, what are the most important attributes when selecting a winning vendor when you're buying something? And look at the things here. The top was, and 72% saying, the timeliness of a vendor's response to inquiries. Now, of course, they're thinking holistically over the buying process, not just the first response on the website, but throughout the buying process. The vendor that was timely was the one that we selected. That was the most important attribute. And that's over things like knowledge of the solution, knowledge of my company, content and business case. In terms of reinforcing the premise of our webcast today, it's great research, but and it's a reminder how important it is to follow up quickly for the reasons that Gabe mentioned. We're just conditioned to I think respond better to people who are timely in responding to us.
Yeah, but I see that, Carl, and I'm obviously biased because I've been doing this research for years, but it's still, it's still surprising that timeliness plays that kind of role in comparison with some of those other things. And I think it's always a good reminder to see that.
Yes. Now, here's my quote of the day. Feel free to tweet this out, #promptness. Let's wait for a few days to contact our hottest prospects, said, no one ever. So we know that you're not sitting back saying, hey, let's design a process where it takes a few days to get a hold of somebody. Nobody is really saying that. So really, what then stands in the way of following up promptly? And Gabe, you have done personally a lot of investigation in this area. Can you walk us through what are some of the challenges in getting this prompt follow-up?
Yeah, again, I'd say there's three things you typically teach you guys when you're talking about sales transformation, and they can be either accelerate your sales process, they're going to decelerate your sales process. And that is people, process, and technology. And people may actually be the reason you're having a slow response time. Might be your process, might be some of your tools. I'm addicted. I'm addicted to sales processes. I've got about 200 in a folder here that I collected. If you ever want me to go through your sales process and give you feedback, I do it probably a couple times a month for people, just because it's so fundamental to be able to visualize and see it. So this is a real client. I've simplified it down, taken off their name, but this was their sales process. And you can see their response time was at 48 hours. And you say, it probably should have been longer than this. I was surprised it was even at 48, but they've got a couple things going on here. One, they get the web leads in. You see that first step. What most of the sales reps didn't realize is that when a web lead came in, it actually went to an individual, and twice a day as part of this person's job description, they would actually farm those leads out. They would at 8 a.m. and at 1 p.m. And they would then say, okay, this is a Utah lead, it goes to John Doe. This is a California lead, it goes to Frank Thomas. And there was this manual routing system, and then it would actually enter into the queue of the sales rep, and the sales rep would see that the new lead was basically created at a certain time. And like you and I mentioned before, Carl, what they didn't realize is that it could have taken maybe a day to actually get created into their CRM entity and into basically their queue. So there's about a day right there. Now, the problem is, one, these were sales reps, and this is a big debate, you guys. Do you feed your good leads to your sales reps, or do you put them to an inbound response team? And I'll hold on answering that for the moment. But once they got these leads, they try to find them via reports and create it, and then they'd open it and they do this research, and a long process there as well. Then they finally went out to reach out to it. So a long process there. Through some coaching, through some ideas around people, process, and technology, we did get them down to about an hour, and maybe you could flip to that and we can kind of show the before
Absolutely.
and the after here, Carl.
The after.
So, they ended up right now and this was truthfully only after about 30 days of really putting their mind to it. I think they can get down lower, but I was telling Carl there is a big if on that, and I'll hit an asterisk there and get it in 1 second. But notice what they changed. They went for some automation and some process optimization, not just at the beginning, but also at the end there. So reinstituted a marketing automation tool, focused on their batch cycle. You'll see sometimes batching happens every 24 hours. I've seen 48 hours. I've seen instant batching, coming from one system to another. They also had a real cool routing technology. Rather than have that person, I've got a vendor I just love, looks at some of the attributes of the lead, and then it shoved them out to the appropriate people in the appropriate time. Then you'll notice they doubled down on kind of their people aspect, had a notification that actually said, hey, new lead here, why don't you hit it? Coached them a little bit better on how to do pre-call research so it wasn't 30 minutes, and then they jumped out on it fairly quickly. Now, the thing is, can they get below an hour? Carl, you and I were talking, and they send these to their sales reps. And so if I'm on a 45-minute demo, no, you're not going to probably get better than an hour in that kind of model. So one of the debates you have to figure out is, if you really want to get response team and you got sales reps who are in the field or doing demos, you want to get to that 5-minute mark, probably going to need to rethink that. And these guys right now are considering changing their sales model, but it's a big debate.
Yeah. Well, that's good progress. We think you can do even much better. Let's cover off then, Gabe, in hitting kind of the definition of the problem, what we call the 7 common promptness pitfalls. And you've already mentioned a couple of these. I'll go through them, and I love your comments. Common pitfall, you mentioned it. We need to figure out the right person that the lead is supposed to go to. That can take time to get that thing routed manually or through a system. Number 2, we got to score the lead, and we don't send everything to sales. So already if I come in and I inquire and I don't hit, 52 points, I might sit in that marketing automation system and not be put in front of anyone for follow-up. 3, we need to verify and enrich the lead before we reach out. We need to, as you said, maybe research that lead before we pick up the phone and call them. And all of this is consuming time. Number 4, you mentioned this as well, Gabe. The person who should follow up on this lead is, and I only listed 5 things here. I probably could have listed a lot more, but we route that lead to someone and they're out of the office. They're on vacation. They're sick that day. They're in the field. They're doing a demo. They're in a meeting. They're on another call. They're at a company all hands meeting. They're at an offsite ropes course team building for their marketing team. Not that that would ever happen. Or frankly, that they're just not interested in following up. We sent that lead over. The person has a Gmail address, and the person who's supposed to follow up said, you know what? I don't have a lot of luck converting Gmail people into customers. I'm just not going to follow up. So this cherry picking. Maybe, as I said, it's just a company policy that we only follow up on people with a corporate email address. Number 6, we do follow up, let's say with an email, but because of deliverability issues, it ends up in the recipient spam folder. To them, it looks like we never did anything at all, and we're perplexed why we're not hearing back. Or number 7, unfortunately, hey, that's just not my job. My job is to create leads, not to figure out how someone should follow up with them quicker, and that does happen. Gabe, any thoughts you want to add on these on the 7 pitfalls?
I think you nailed it with these. I mean, I've heard, and looks like we're getting a couple of questions on this. One big thing is, if I respond too fast, Carl, am I going to offend people? Am I going to scare people? Is it too much? Is it too, Big Brother is, is it too, like I'm watching all their type of stuff. So, my response to that one is, having done this for a long time, you guys, all often with these research studies we do, I'll actually call up people and say, hey, you responded like this on the survey, or what do you think, or how do you feel? And having literally talked to hundreds of people about lead responsiveness, the number one word coming out of our qualitative pieces when people respond quickly to leads is wow. Wow, they hustle, or wow, that's fast, or people want to buy from people who hustle. So, guys, I wouldn't be offended. I wouldn't be afraid to respond to people. I think you're going to get more people who say, wow, is this the kind of business you guys do? Yeah, we do things fast and we do it with urgency. That's how our mantra. The second thing, Carl, is, and I think there's again some debate even in kind of the Q&A here of, how do I think about strategic promptness? If I'm running an account-based motion and I'm kind of going outbound and I'm targeting bigger accounts, I mean, does it still require promptness when I'm thinking of kind of an outbound, more strategic motion? And the answer to that is always, I think you start with the answer is always yes, but there's going to be some exceptions. But start with this point, I think. Guys, again, if they're good, high-quality leads and they've interacted in a meaningful way, call it high priority, call it high score, they deserve quick response. And I think that handles 90% of the situations. For the other 10, let's debate and discuss them.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. I wanted to reinforce that in the research that we did on lead follow-up, we're not trying to find some obscure white paper buried 7 pages deep on the website, fill out a form, and then shocked that nobody follows up. We're going to the most prominent, like contact us now to get a quote. Request a demo now button right on the homepage. And I don't think you should be scared, as you said, Gabe, of following up immediately with people who have said, I want to hear from you. So we're going to quickly run our poll number 2 here. Which of these, and we selected 5 of these, which of these pitfalls, promptness pitfalls, do you think is most likely to be an issue in your organization? So go ahead and submit your votes on, is it slow to get to the right person, slow to score, slow to verify, the person doesn't follow up, even though we've gotten it to them, or it's really just not my issue. And here comes the votes, and I'm seeing a lot around the person doesn't follow up for the number of reasons that we put there. Although, interestingly, we're seeing Gabe, around 20%, dropping a little bit, that are it's tough to figure out the right person or to get the right data on the lead to know who the right person is to follow up. So I'm not surprised about that. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, the person, it's a people problem, interesting. I wonder it'd be interesting, Carl, to kind of see what what's the one click on that, as far as why, why aren't they following up? Are they not seeing it? Are they not getting it in time? Or they don't think it's important enough? If I'm a sales rep and a nice juicy lead pops into my queue, I mean, we know that the majority of reps aren't hitting quota. I'm surprised to see that most people say that's the reason for slow response time.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's wrap up here on this section and say we understand and sympathize with our audience here. It's not easy to do this consistently well. I mean, think about it. Following up on every inquiry within 5 minutes, because that's what your research shows we should be doing. Doing that every single time. And of course, we're not talking, Gabe, about Saturday or Tuesday night at 2 a.m. when someone's inquiring. This is during business hours. But so doing that consistently, it's hard to do. And so what we're suggesting is look for the ways to get better. You don't have to get to the 5-minute window. You should try, because of the dramatic increase in contact rate. The average of all the companies we surveyed was 25-hour response time. That's not great. If you can get to 13 minutes, that was the average of all the A-graded companies that we evaluated. So these guys aren't getting to 5 minutes. Your goal should be to head there, but try and get within 15 minutes. And it's possible if you have the right process in place and the right people in place, as you said, Gabe. It makes economic sense to do this. The research shows that you need to be prompt, and you shouldn't risk offending people. Now, this wouldn't be a webinar without the word from our sponsor. So that bell indicates we have 1 minute, Gabe, each to talk about, well, how can Inside Sales and Conversica help our viewers do this better? And let me just say, so on the left, we have Conversica. So what do? We provide a conversational AI sales assistant that can reach out to leads immediately and engage them in a personal one-to-one communication over email or text message, however they prefer. And so you can tackle this promptness by deploying this in an email way. There's power to doing email and there's power to doing the phone. So Gabe, tell us a little bit about how Inside Sales helps in promptness.
Yeah, I actually love the combination, Carl, of both Conversica here and InsideSales.com. So we help, it's an AI-powered sales acceleration platform that really allows you to prioritize when these leads come in and then alert a rep that they're in and then reach out via phone to these prioritized leads in a very effective and efficient manner. That's it. I mean, when it comes to lead response time, you want to know who to go after. You want to know that they're there, and you need a method to go after them, and then that's where InsideSales.com comes in.
Perfect. So that we have a combination of email automation, reaching out. We have phone dialing and prioritizing these hot leads to the top of your list and getting a phone call out. Even if you don't reach someone, dropping that voicemail in and letting them know that you heard their request and you're there to help. I think this is the power of these kinds of technologies to help with promptness. So
yeah, and I think, Carl, just to add, I mean promptness is where it starts, and to the kind of your point you were just mentioning, it needs to start there, but if you're going to get them, a good follow-up strategy is obviously very important. So I'm glad you kind of hit that as well.
Yes, and remember, we're here talking about promptness, but as we see here on our question slide, so we've reached the question portion of our webinar. So do submit your questions. Promptness is just one aspect of it, and you're absolutely right, Gabe. And this is the first in a series of webinars talking about what we call the 4 Ps, which in this context are promptness, persistence, so you can't give up after 1 or 2 tries, personalization, making this all feel very human, and performance, that you got to land, you got to be dialing the right number, and you got to be landing your messages in the inbox. So those are coming up, and in the follow-up email that you get at the end of the webinar, we'll include details about how you can register for those follow-ups. So we're going to take questions now. Gabe and I are very good at promptness. We started the webinar right on time, but we're not so good at being within the window, but that's okay. So
that wasn't part of the webinar, Carl.
That's
that
true.
Wasn't part of it. It's only about promptness. We were talking about
starting promptly, ending promptly is maybe not our skill set. But let's take questions, and people can stick on as long as they'd like, and we'll take some of these questions. Gabe, sounds like you've been monitoring the question queue. Are there a few that you want to bring up?
Well, a couple. It was actually Carl here. Carl mentioned this question. I was kind of weaving it into my talk track a little bit, but he said, one concern about promptness, does haste make waste? And then he says maybe strategic promptness might be appropriate. And Carl, I'd love to kind of hear your more thoughts on that. But my quick response to it, Carl, and I'd be interested to hear yours, was, again, I think you start with haste. Because knowing human decision-making behavior and the importance of speed, I think you start there, Carl. And then as I've mentioned, let's move out into some of the exceptions. So if I'm running an account-based model and I'm being quote-unquote strategic, and, someone, I've been targeting them, and maybe a lower-level manager downloads, some research study that doesn't have to do directly with my product, should I immediately go after that person, or should I consider that as part of the rest of my outreach to that company? The answer is probably yes. Especially if that guide or that thing is a super high level, top of funnel piece of content. And maybe that's the time where you don't respond quickly, especially if you're already in conversations with somebody else. So there's going to be exceptions, I think, on this, Carl, but rather than start with the exceptions, let's start with the rule. And I think that's one thing we miss.
That's right. And I think you're spot on. And I would just add to that, responding promptly doesn't mean that the lead you're trying to reach, has to respond to you. You're extending that offer. Hey, I'm here to help. I'd love to connect with you. I'm sending that by email, by phone call. It doesn't mean that the person is necessarily ready to engage, and that's fine. But you have made the attempt, and you said, we're the vendor to work with. We follow up promptly. Now, the other part of that conversation was about haste makes waste, and fair point. We all have limited human bandwidth in our organization, and if we're going to try and follow up with every inquiry within 5 minutes, that can be taxing on our humans. So I'll just do a Conversica promo here and say, well, you don't need to have humans do it anymore. You can have your AI sales assistant reach out and do that initial outreach. It's a personal one-to-one email, and say, hey, I see you, asked for a quote. That's great. Jim, your account manager, will be in the office tomorrow at 8. Is that a good time for a call? So you don't have to tax your human organization to be able to jump on these leads promptly.
Yeah, and Carl, I think that goes well with John's got a question there that came in, and you kind of already answered it, but he says, for small B2B vendors that are generally generating global interest but don't have a global sales team, how do you kind of reduce that response time with all these different time zones? And again, plug for kind of just the comment you made was, maybe you don't have to, maybe you can put in an AI assistant, John, using Conversica. I've seen it work time and time again, and that's definitely one of the ways I think you'd plug it. I got one more point. Carl, what would you add to that?
I would say you're absolutely right. Even, think about a company that's, let's say, North American based. but to the viewers' comment. But I'm getting inquiries from around the world. Those could be coming in at 2 in the morning on Saturday at 6 a.m. or 9 p.m. You want to be prompt with those as well. We live in a global economy now. People expect that if I'm expressing interest in a product or service, I'm going to be followed up with in my time zone. So there are ways to do that now with automation that, frankly, were not really possible before with humans in a small company, per that question.
Yeah, I do think, the other thing, so I think the quick answer to that, John, is what Carl said. I mean, let's look for automation to supplant some of your weaknesses. The other thing I don't think people do, and I've done this with a handful of companies, is let's just find out what is actually happening. I was with a company based here out of Salt Lake, and they sell a lot into education, in the educational space, and they just found a lot of the students and professors were coming on during the weekend, and so truthfully, they did a slightly different staffing model. If they had, they had about 20% of their leads coming on Saturday, and it was like, if that's true, maybe we should put staff somebody, and they got a part-time person to do it. And so I think actually just getting the visualization on what's going on to really know, are we getting most of our leads here, or there, then you can probably adjust your solution accordingly.
That's a great example to share. I think, we're getting a number of questions about, well, really, I mean, every lead, I mean, what if it's not the right company or the right prospect? If it's not fully qualified, should we really follow up? And I guess the question I would ask back to our audience is, go just test the most important offer that you're putting out there today. Once again, I'm not necessarily saying that a tertiary offer way down. Here's a great, more concrete example. You registered for today's webinar. You don't expect someone to call you within 1 minute of registering for a webinar saying, hey, can I sell you something? You're registering for a webinar. You expect the next time you're going to hear from me is when I send you that reminder 10 minutes before, please join. But remember, we're talking about the most important, contact me immediately kind of offer on your website. So I encourage each of you to go and test that request a quote, request a demo, contact me now button that should be in the header of every website out there. And let's make sure we're following up promptly on those. Those are critical to your business success.
Yeah, and the other thing I'd add to that, Carl, is I feel like, one of the things we do here at Inside Sales, I mean, we have played around with these different approaches and different models, but if you do respond to someone immediately, the first things out of your mouth doesn't have to be, will you buy my product? Or I noticed you downloaded this piece. Do you want to buy my product? It can be somewhat of a guided selling motion. So, hey, I noticed you downloaded this ebook. Did you know we had a webinar next week about lead response time? Is that something you'd be of interest? There's other ways that aren't. You can continue to guide people down the sales process that isn't so much of every time they click on something, ask them to buy something.
Yes, that's really great insight about, well, what do you do when you follow up? So perfect to share that. And thank you, Gabe. We've gotten a number of questions about how this might apply in an outbound prospecting, cold calling, or cold outreach scenario. And I just want to clarify, we're talking here exclusively about following up with hand raisers, someone who's come to you and said, I want to do business with your company, or I want to learn more. Please get in touch with me, and how important it is to do that quickly. So it's a whole nother topic to say, hey, how should your outreach work when you are prospecting into accounts and you're trying to get those hands to be raised? I think that's a whole nother topic, and maybe, Gabe, we take that up in a future webcast.
It is, and I think to your point, it's important to separate those two, you guys. I mean, I still think one principle does stand true, right? I mean, if a high-quality person asks to be contacted, you need to get back to them. But know that certainly if you're running an outbound account-based model and you're thinking about kind of that strategy, start to split them, because we're talking here mostly about if someone goes to something, grabs an entity, grabs an offer that is obviously something that's more meaty, how should you handle that? And it's probably two different conversations here.
Fair enough. let's grab one more question and then follow up with the others. We've gotten lots, which is great. Thank you so much for your participation. This is really about lead quality. And I think what it gets to is, well, what if somebody fills out my form with bogus information, right? They put in a bad phone number, or I can't imagine anyone ever doing this, putting in an email address that doesn't exist or a throwaway email address in order to get that download of information from the website. And yeah, if you're overburdening your humans by sending them lousy leads of MickeyMouse.com, they're not going to be particularly excited about following up quickly. So I think this is another place where automation, both with tools you already have, for example, in our marketing automation here at Conversica, we can screen out bad email addresses and not we don't have to worry about chasing those leads, or apply automation. And once again, have your AI sales assistant do it. She doesn't care. She'll follow up with every lead, good, bad, or indifferent. She never gets tired or pushes back. So with that, Gabe, I'm going to throw it to you for any last comments or remarks you want to make, and then we will wrap up today's session.
Yeah, guys, really appreciate it. First, Carl, love what Conversica does. And again, I love the synergy between what InsideSales.com does and Conversica. So thanks for having us on. Number two, guys, let's continue the conversation. I'll be offended if you don't grab me on LinkedIn. Let's continue to debate and discuss. We have a fun little tool if you want to test out your lead response time. Leadresponseaudit.com. Hit me up. We can continue this conversation. Would love to take it to the next step.
Thank you for that offer, Gabe. And thank you now once again to all of our viewers. We're going to award 5 Amazon gift cards, much to the chagrin of my marketing team here, because I think we said we were only giving away 1, but I decided it should be 5 because you're such a great audience with so many great questions. So we're going to randomly draw from the folks who are on right now, and we'll notify you in a follow-up email and send that over to you. A little fun here at the end of our webcast. And one last plug, we're going to talk about persistence next month. And that is a really topic, it's a great topic as well. And, how many times should I try to reach someone who has reached out to my company? So you're going to find some really great research in that webinar as well. Thank you, Gabe. Thanks to our audience, and enjoy the rest of your day.